The storm had come in quietly, a whisper of rain pattering against the eaves of Ethan Voss's weathered house, before it erupted into a cacophony of thunder and wind. Ethan sat in his small, dimly lit studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases and jars of turpentine. The storm was a fitting backdrop to his mood, brooding, unsettled, and full of unspoken questions he dared not face. The brush in his hand hesitated mid-stroke, the unfinished outline of a distant alien horizon staring back at him from the canvas. Then came the knock. Ethan froze, the sound impossibly distinct over the howl of the wind. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Nearly midnight. No one visited him at this hour, not in his remote home, nestled at the edge of the dense Oregon woods. The knock came again, insistent but oddly measured, like a hand unbothered by the raging storm. Ethan approached the door with trepidation, his pulse quickening. Gripping the cold doorknob, he braced himself before swinging the door open. A figure stood on his doorstep, drenched but unshaken. She was tall, her presence commanding despite her soaked appearance. Her silvery skin gleamed faintly in the dim porch light, as if reflecting an inner luminescence. Eyes of molten amber locked onto his, unblinking, and her features were sharp yet hauntingly symmetrical, almost too perfect to be real. "Ethan Voss," she said, her voice a peculiar blend of warmth and steel. "I am Leora. I was created to protect you." Ethan stared at her, every instinct screaming at him that this was a dream, or a prank, or a hallucination. Yet her gaze, unwavering and unnervingly focused, suggested none of those things. "Protect me?" he echoed, his voice thick with disbelief. "From what?" "From harm," she replied simply, as though the answer was self-evident. The wind gusted, throwing rain into the house. Ethan stepped back reflexively, and Leora took it as an invitation, crossing the threshold with an ease that bordered on presumptuous. "Hey, wait, you can't just—" "I can," she interrupted, shaking water from her short metallic-toned hair. "And I must." She took in the surroundings with a calm, analytical air, her gaze briefly lingering on the scattered canvases before turning back to Ethan. "Your home is quaint." Ethan blinked, struggling to keep up. "Quaint? What are you? And why are you here?" Leora tilted her head, her expression softening ever so slightly. "I am from Avareth, a world far from this one. Your safety is my sole purpose. For now, that is all you need to know." Ethan shook his head, frustration rising. "No, that's not all I need to know. You show up out of nowhere talking like some kind of alien bodyguard, and you expect me to just accept that?" Leora's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. Was it amusement? "Accepting it would make things simpler, yes. But I do not expect simplicity." The absurdity of the situation hit Ethan all at once, and he laughed, short, sharp, and humorless. "This is insane." "No," Leora said, stepping closer. "This is survival." For a moment, Ethan considered throwing her out, but something in her tone, in the way she carried herself, made him pause. She didn't seem dangerous, at least not to him. And beneath her calm exterior, there was an intensity, a quiet urgency, that unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Before he could say anything more, the lights flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. "Stay here," Leora commanded, her voice cutting through the blackness like a blade. "What?" Ethan began, but she was already moving, her lithe frame disappearing into the shadows. A crash echoed from the back of the house. Adrenaline surged through Ethan as he grabbed a flashlight from the counter and followed the sound, his heart pounding. He found Leora in the kitchen, standing over the shattered remains of the back window. Rain poured in through the jagged opening, but it wasn't the storm that had caused the damage. Something had broken in. Ethan's flashlight beam caught a faint glimmer of movement outside, a shadow slipping into the woods. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Leora turned to him, her expression grim. "Your first lesson in trust, Ethan Voss. Do not question my presence. They have found you." "They?" Ethan echoed, his blood running cold. Leora didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the rain-soaked night, her form almost blending with the storm. Ethan hesitated only a moment before following, his flashlight bobbing erratically as he struggled to keep up. Outside, the storm raged, the wind tearing through the trees with a ferocity that matched the chaos in Ethan's mind. He stumbled after Leora, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who are they?" he demanded. "What do they want?" Leora stopped abruptly, turning to face him. "Questions later. Survival now." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp, metallic whine pierced the air. Leora moved with inhuman speed, shoving him to the ground, just as a burst of searing energy scorched the space where he'd been standing. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the storm. Leora didn't answer. She stood between him and their unseen assailants, her hands glowing with an otherworldly light. A second blast of energy shot toward them, but Leora raised her hand, deflecting it with a shimmering barrier that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Ethan stared in disbelief as Leora advanced, her movements precise and unyielding. The attackers, shadows moving with eerie fluidity, retreated into the woods, their presence vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. When the silence returned, broken only by the rain, Leora turned to Ethan. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Inside." Ethan nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to argue. As they made their way back to the house, one thought echoed in his mind. His life, once so ordinary, had just become anything but. Ethan stood in the living room, arms crossed tightly over his chest, as Leora methodically sealed the shattered back window with an intricate device she had retrieved from somewhere within her sleek, weatherproof suit. The storm still raged outside, but the room felt unnaturally still, like the calm eye of a hurricane. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The way she moved, efficient, precise, with a grace that seemed almost predatory, unnerved him as much as it fascinated him. She was alien in every sense of the word, yet there was something hauntingly human about the furrow of her brow as she worked, as though she carried the weight of the world, or perhaps worlds, on her shoulders. "Are you going to explain what just happened?" Ethan asked finally, breaking the tense silence. Leora didn't look up. "You were targeted." "Yeah, I got that part. By who? And why?" She paused, her amber eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "Their name is Nova Vigil. They are human, like you, but their objectives are misguided. They seek power, no matter the cost." Ethan's heart sank. Power. What kind of power? Leora hesitated, her fingers stilling over the device. For the first time, she looked unsure. "There is something in your lineage, Ethan Voss, something valuable, an artifact tied to the stability of your world, and others." Ethan blinked. "An artifact? My lineage? I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a guy who paints landscapes and tries to avoid small talk at the grocery store." A flicker of amusement crossed her face, fleeting but unmistakable. "You underestimate yourself. Your life may seem ordinary, but your existence is not. Whether you understand it or not, Nova Vigil sees you as a key to what they desire. That makes you dangerous to them and valuable to me." He didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "Valuable? Lady, I'm a walking anxiety attack, not some chosen one in a sci-fi epic." At that, Leora straightened, her expression softening in a way that caught him off guard. "I understand that this is overwhelming. Your fear is justified. But I am here to ensure you survive long enough to make sense of it all." Something in her tone, gentle, almost tender, sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He wanted to dismiss it as another layer of alien weirdness, but there was something undeniably sincere about the way she looked at him, as though she had already endured more on his behalf than he could fathom. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "So, what's the plan?" Ethan asked eventually, his voice quieter now. Leora resumed her work on the window, her movements deliberate. "First, we fortify this location, Then we prepare you for what is to come. The artifact must be found and secured before Nova Vigil can claim it." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Sure, easy. Just another Tuesday, right?" This time her smile was faint but genuine. "Sarcasm suits you, Ethan Voss. It may even keep you alive." As the storm waned, Leora began setting up additional defenses, her strange, compact devices emitting faint hums as they activated. Ethan watched her with a mix of fascination and apprehension. "What's it like?" he asked suddenly. She paused. "What is what like?" "Your world. Avereth." Her expression shifted, a subtle but profound change, as though the word itself held immense gravity. "It is vast, beautiful, a place where life is cherished above all else. We do not wage war. We build, we create, we seek harmony." Her voice carried a wistfulness that Ethan hadn't expected, and for a moment he could almost see it, an alien utopia shimmering on the edges of his imagination. "And yet," he said carefully, "you're here, protecting me from people who do wage war." Leora's gaze darkened. "Even in harmony there are cracks, imperfections. My queen saw those cracks spreading, and she sent me to ensure they do not reach you." Ethan frowned. "Your queen? She sounds intense." A flicker of something passed across Leora's face, admiration perhaps, or reverence. "She is wise, compassionate, and resolute. She sees value in you, Ethan Voss, enough to risk much." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I hope she's not betting the farm on me. I'm not exactly hero material." "You may surprise yourself," Leora said softly, her amber eyes meeting his with a depth that made his breath catch. As the hours passed, their uneasy truce began to take on the shape of something more tangible. Leora explained her mission in fragments, her words tinged with both conviction and an undercurrent of sadness Ethan couldn't quite place. He found himself asking more questions than he intended, not because he needed to know, but because he wanted to understand her. "How does someone like you, someone from a place like Avereth, end up doing this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely to the chaos surrounding them. Leora hesitated, her hand stilling over one of her devices. "I was created for this purpose, to serve, to protect. My life is not my own." Ethan frowned. "Created? Like a machine?" "Not entirely." She looked at him then, her gaze piercing. "My existence was engineered, yes, but my choices are mine. My queen ensured that." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The idea of someone being engineered was unsettling enough, but the way she spoke of it, with a mix of resignation and quiet pride, made it all the more difficult to process. "So, do you ever—" He stopped himself, unsure if he was crossing a line. "Do I ever what?" "Wish things were different, that you could just live for yourself?" Her expression softened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something fragile beneath her composed exterior. "Wishing," she said quietly, "is a luxury I cannot afford." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Not that night. As the storm finally subsided, Ethan lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Leora sat across the room, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the door as though daring the universe to challenge her. "Do you even sleep?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. "Rarely," she replied without turning. "Must be nice." She glanced at him then, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You would not enjoy it as much as you think." Ethan chuckled softly, surprised by the ease of their exchange. Despite the strangeness of it all, the danger, the mystery, the sheer impossibility of her presence, he felt an odd sense of comfort knowing she was there. As his eyelids grew heavy, a thought lingered at the edges of his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd always believed. Ethan woke to the sharp aroma of brewed tea and the soft hum of Leora's voice. It was not a melody, but a string of sounds that vibrated at a frequency both soothing and alien. He opened his eyes to find her standing near the window, gazing out at the dense forest. Her lips moved in quiet repetition, and he realized she was speaking, not to him, but into a device she held, her words too low for him to discern. For a moment, Ethan simply watched. Her figure was backlit by the pale morning light filtering through the repaired glass, lending her an almost ethereal quality. He had 100 questions about her world, about why the universe had chosen him of all people. But one question, small and selfish, lingered foremost in his mind. Did she ever feel as lost as he did? "Eavesdropping is impolite," she said without turning, her tone calm but edged with dry humor. Ethan jolted upright on the couch. I wasn't trying to—" He trailed off, scratching the back of his neck. "Good morning?" Leora turned, her expression unreadable. "Good is a relative term. I would suggest readiness instead." "Readiness?" Ethan repeated, his stomach sinking. "What now?" She gestured toward the forest. "Nova Vigil will not be deterred by a single skirmish. They are patient, methodical. They will return. We must prepare for that inevitability." Ethan sighed, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "And by prepare, you mean—" "Training," she said simply. Ethan blinked. "Training? You mean like combat training?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You may yet surprise yourself, Ethan Voss." The clearing Leora had chosen for their training was a short hike from the house, surrounded by towering fir trees that seemed to watch their every move. Ethan had spent much of his adult life avoiding physical exertion, and the trek left him winded and irritable. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, leaning against a tree. "I'm not some action hero. Can't we just hide out until your alien tech scares them off?" Leora raised an eyebrow. "And if their numbers grow? If their tactics evolve? Will you rely on luck alone to survive?" Ethan scowled but didn't argue. She had a way of making him feel like a petulant child, though he suspected it wasn't intentional. Leora handed him a sleek, lightweight staff made of an unidentifiable metal. Its surface shimmered faintly in the sunlight. "Begin," she said. Ethan stared at her. "Begin what?" She moved with startling speed, her own staff striking his in a blur of motion. The force nearly knocked it from his hands, and he stumbled back, heart racing. "Hey!" he shouted. "A little warning would have been nice." Her amber eyes sparkled with amusement. "The enemy will not warn you, Ethan Voss. Adapt." The next hour passed in a blur of humiliation and frustration. Leora moved with fluid precision, her strikes controlled but relentless. Ethan, by contrast, flailed like a man trying to swat a particularly aggressive wasp. "I'm not cut out for this," he gasped after she disarmed him for the 5th time. "You are cut out for survival," she countered, her tone firm but not unkind. "You must learn to trust your instincts. Hesitation will kill you." Ethan slumped against a tree, glaring at her. "You make it sound so easy." "It is not," she said, her expression softening. "But it is necessary." And by the time they returned to the house, Ethan's muscles were screaming in protest. He collapsed onto the couch, groaning. "You'll survive," Leora said dryly, setting her staff against the wall. "Barely," he muttered. She sat across from him, her posture impossibly straight. For a while they sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on them. "Why do you care so much?" Ethan asked suddenly. Leora's gaze met his, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice quiet. "Because you matter. To my queen, to your world. Perhaps even to the universe itself." Ethan laughed, though there was no humor in it. "That's a lot of pressure to put on one guy." "Pressure can shape," she said, "or it can crush. The choice is yours." Night fell swiftly, and with it came an uneasy stillness. Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the dark expanse of the forest. "Do you think they're out there?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leora appeared at his side, her presence as quiet as a shadow. "It is likely." Ethan swallowed hard. "Do you ever get scared?" She tilted her head, considering. "Fear is a companion I have known, but it does not control me." "I wish I could say the same," Ethan muttered. She turned to him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "Fear is not weakness, Ethan Voss. It is proof of your will to survive." He glanced at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "As are you." In the dead of night, the first sign of trouble came as a faint rustling, barely audible over the sound of the wind. Ethan, half asleep on the couch, jolted awake as Leora's hand clamped over his mouth. "Quiet," she whispered, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She gestured toward the window, where a shadow moved, unnatural, deliberate. Ethan's heart pounded as Leora retrieved her staff and moved toward the door, her movements soundless. She turned to him, her expression resolute. "Stay here. Do not move." Ethan wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She stepped outside, and the door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the sounds of struggle, footsteps, grunts, the sharp crack of something breaking. Ethan couldn't stand it. He grabbed the staff Leora had given him earlier and pushed the door open, stepping out into the night. The forest was alive with movement, shadows clashing in a chaotic dance. Ethan spotted Leora locked in combat with two figures, their forms shifting and flickering as though they weren't entirely solid. One of them broke away, heading straight for Ethan. Panic surged through him, but so did something else, something raw and primal. He gripped the staff tightly and swung as hard as he could, the impact reverberating through his arms as it connected. The figure staggered, then dissolved into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Leora dispatched her remaining opponent with a swift, calculated strike. She turned to Ethan, her expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "I told you to stay inside," she said. Ethan shrugged, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Guess I don't follow orders well." For the first time, Leora laughed, a quiet, melodic sound that sent a strange warmth through him. "Perhaps," she said, "that will be your strength." The morning light filtered through the thick canopy of trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Ethan sat on the porch steps, absently tracing a finger along the smooth surface of the alien staff resting across his lap. It was both familiar and foreign, a reflection of how he now felt in his own skin. Inside the house, Leora moved with her usual deliberate grace, preparing what she called a field ration from a small shimmering container. Ethan had tried the strange food once and immediately regretted it. Something about the way it fizzed and dissolved on his tongue made him question the limits of human taste buds. He looked up as she stepped out, her expression composed but distant. She had been quiet since last night's attack, her usual calm tinged with something Ethan couldn't quite identify. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "what's next? More training? Another midnight brawl with shadow people?" Leora's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Today, we prepare for a journey." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Journey? To where?" "To a place where you can begin to understand the truth," she said cryptically. "It is time you saw a glimpse of my world." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, you mean Avarith? You're taking me to your planet?" "Not yet," she said, shaking her head. "But there are places here on your world where the boundaries between our realms thin. We will go to one of these places." Ethan frowned. "Sounds dangerous." "It is," she admitted, "but it is also necessary." The journey began with a hike deeper into the forest, the terrain growing wilder and more treacherous with every step. Leora led the way, her movements fluid and unerring, while Ethan stumbled and cursed his way over roots and uneven ground. "Do you ever trip?" he asked, panting. She glanced back at him, her expression serene. "Rarely." "Of course," he muttered, brushing dirt off his jeans. "Must be nice being perfect." She paused, her gaze softening. "I am far from perfect, Ethan Voss, but I have had lifetimes to practice." The weight of her words hit him like a stone. Lifetimes. He realized, not for the first time, how little he truly understood about her. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Lifetimes?" She hesitated, as though weighing whether to answer. "My existence is prolonged. By design. I have seen many seasons, both in Avareth and here." Ethan stared at her. "How old are you?" "Older than you can imagine," she said simply. The answer didn't surprise him as much as it should have. In a strange way, it made sense. There was a timelessness about her, an aura of wisdom and sadness that no mere mortal could carry. They reached the edge of a ravine as the sun began its descent. A narrow, winding path led down into the shadowy depths, where mist clung to the air like a living thing. "We're going down there?" Ethan asked, his stomach churning. "Yes," Leora said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The boundary lies at the heart of this place." Ethan swallowed hard, but followed her down the path, his grip on the staff tightening with every step. The air grew colder and heavier as they descended, the mist thickening until it felt like walking through a dream. At the bottom of the ravine, they came upon a circle of jagged stones, each one etched with intricate glowing symbols. The air buzzed with an energy that made Ethan's skin crawl. "What is this place?" he whispered. Leora stepped into the circle, her movements reverent. "A nexus, a point where the threads of our worlds intertwine." Ethan followed her reluctantly, the hum of the stones growing louder with each step. "And what are we supposed to do here?" "Listen," she said, closing her eyes. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but stopped when he felt it, a faint vibration beneath his feet, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The air seemed to shimmer, the mist parting to reveal fleeting glimpses of something vast and otherworldly. "Do you see it?" Leora asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure how to describe what he was seeing. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, a world layered over his own. He saw towering spires, crystalline forests, and skies that pulsed with colors he couldn't name. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It is my home," Leora said, her voice tinged with longing. Ethan turned to her, struck by the vulnerability in her expression. For the first time, he saw not the perfect, composed protector, but someone who had left everything she knew and loved behind. "Do you miss it?" he asked softly. "Every moment," she admitted. "But my duty lies here." Ethan hesitated before reaching out, placing a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry for all of this." She looked at him, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Do not apologize for what you cannot control, Ethan Voss. You did not choose this path, but you must walk it." And their moment was interrupted by a sudden piercing shriek that echoed through the ravine. Ethan's blood turned to ice as a shadowy figure emerged from the mist, its form twisting and writhing as though it were barely tethered to reality. "Stay behind me," Leora commanded, her staff snapping to life with a pulse of energy. Ethan obeyed, his heart pounding as more figures appeared, their movements erratic and unnatural. "Nova Vigil?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No," Leora said grimly. "Something worse." The first figure lunged, and Leora met it head-on, her staff slicing through the air with deadly precision. The others closed in, their inhuman screeches filling the air. Ethan gripped his staff tightly, his instincts screaming at him to run. But as he watched Leora fight, something inside him shifted. She had risked everything for him, and now she was outnumbered and outmatched. He couldn't just stand there. With a shaky breath, He stepped forward and swung his staff at the nearest figure. To his surprise, it connected, the impact sending the creature reeling. "Good," Leora called, her voice filled with approval. "Keep moving." Ethan didn't have time to process her words as another figure lunged at him. He dodged clumsily, his heart racing as he struck out again. The battle was chaotic and terrifying, but slowly, Ethan began to find a rhythm. The staff felt less like a foreign object and more like an extension of himself. When the last creature dissolved into the mist, Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. "You fought well," Leora said, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "I fought," Ethan muttered, his hands trembling. "Well is debatable." She smiled faintly, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "You survived. That is what matters." As they left the ravine, the nexus fading behind them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, not just in the world, but in himself. For the first time, he began to wonder if he might be capable of more than he had ever imagined. The house felt different when Ethan and Leora returned from the nexus. The walls seemed narrower, the air heavier, as though the world had contracted around them. Leora busied herself repairing the damage to her suit, minor tears in its strange, shimmering fabric, while Ethan stared out the window, his mind spinning with the day's events. The glimpse into Avereth had unsettled something deep within him. It wasn't just the beauty of the place, though it had been breathtaking. It was the realization that his life, his ordinary, predictable life, might be part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. He glanced at Leora, her movements precise and methodical as she worked. He couldn't help but admire her, though he doubted she noticed. She was a warrior, a protector, and somehow a tether to a world he didn't yet understand. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked, breaking the silence. Her hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. "Tiredness is a luxury I cannot afford." "That's not an answer," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. She looked up at him, her amber eyes soft but unwavering. "Yes, Ethan Voss. I get tired, but my duty sustains me." He nodded, unsure how to respond. Before he could think of something to say, a sharp, chiming sound filled the room. Leora stood abruptly, her expression alert. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his pulse quickening. She held up a small device, its surface glowing with intricate patterns. A communication. From the Queen. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't forgotten the cryptic message Leora had relayed to him. The alien Queen loved him and had sent Leora to protect him. It was an idea so absurd he hadn't dared to dwell on it, but now it seemed he couldn't avoid it any longer. Do I need to do something?" he asked, his voice wavering. Leora gave him a faint, almost apologetic smile. "Number, but you may want to listen." She activated the device, and the air around them shimmered. A figure materialized, a tall, regal woman with pale, opalescent skin and eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Her presence filled the room, even as her form remained translucent and insubstantial. "Ethan Voss," the Queen said, her voice melodic and resonant. Ethan stood frozen, his mouth dry. Hi?" The Queen's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "I see you are as endearing as Leora has described." Ethan glanced at Leora, who avoided his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. I don't understand any of this," Ethan admitted, his voice cracking. "Why me? Why send her?" The Queen's expression softened. "You are more important than you realize, Ethan Voss. Your existence is a thread in a tapestry that spans galaxies. I sent Leora not only to protect you, but to guide you toward your destiny." Ethan shook his head, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm just a guy, a normal, boring guy. How can I be important to anyone, let alone you?" The Queen's gaze was steady, unyielding. "You underestimate yourself, but I do not." Silence hung heavy between them until the Queen spoke again. I wish to invite you to Evereth, Ethan Voss, to see my world, to understand your place in it. Ethan's heart pounded. And if I say no? The Queen's smile faded slightly, but her tone remained gentle. That is your choice, but I believe you will find your answer not in retreat, but in seeking the truth. Before Ethan could respond, the image flickered and disappeared, leaving the room eerily quiet. Ethan sat on the porch steps long after the sun had set, staring up at the stars. They had always seemed distant and unknowable, but now they felt like something else, like a promise or a challenge. Leora joined him, her footsteps silent. She sat beside him, her presence grounding but unobtrusive. You didn't tell me she thought I was endearing, Ethan said, his tone teasing but hollow. Leora gave him a sidelong glance. It was not relevant to your survival. He chuckled softly, then sobered. What do you think I should do? Her gaze turned toward the sky. It is not my place to decide for you, but I believe you have more courage than you give yourself credit for. Ethan sighed. That's not an answer. No, she said, her lips twitching into a faint smile. It is not. The next morning, Ethan awoke to find Leora preparing for their next journey. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, the weight of the Queen's invitation hanging over them. I need to think, Ethan said finally, his voice quiet. Leora nodded, her expression unreadable. Then think quickly. Nova Vigil will not wait for you to decide. Ethan hesitated, then stepped outside. The forest felt different today, less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. He wandered aimlessly, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. Eventually, he found himself back at the ravine, standing at the edge of the nexus. The stones no longer glowed, but the memory of their hum lingered in his mind. What am I supposed to do? He whispered, his voice swallowed by the vastness of the forest. He didn't expect an answer, but he got one anyway. A figure emerged from the mist. A man, tall and imposing, with sharp features and piercing eyes. Ethan Voss, the man said, his voice smooth and cold. Ethan's blood ran cold. Who are you? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A friend, or an enemy. That depends on you. Before Ethan could respond, Leora appeared, her staff drawn and her expression fierce. Nova Vigil, she said, her voice low and dangerous. The man's smile widened. Ah, the Queen's faithful hound, how predictable. Leora moved to stand between Ethan and the man, her stance protective. Leave, now. The man tilted his head, as though considering her words. Then, without warning, he lunged. The battle was swift and brutal, Leora's movements a blur as she fought the intruder. Ethan could only watch, his heart pounding, as the reality of his situation came crashing down. When the man finally retreated, his form dissolving into shadows, Ethan sank to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This is only the beginning, Leora said, her voice steady but grim. The Queen's invitation may be the only way to end this. Ethan looked up at her, his fear and uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. For the first time, he realized that they were both standing on the edge of something far greater than themselves, and there was no turning back. Ethan had never felt so out of place in his own life. The Queen's invitation lingered in his mind, a constant hum beneath the noise of his thoughts. He sat in his living room, tracing the grain of the wooden table with his fingertips, while Leora moved about the room with practiced efficiency. She was preparing for something, though what exactly, Ethan wasn't sure. You're awfully calm for someone who just fought off a shadow assassin, Ethan said, attempting to mask his unease with humor. Leora paused, glancing at him with her signature inscrutable expression. Calm is a necessity. Panic invites mistakes. Ethan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. And here I thought you were just unshakable. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, gone as quickly as it had appeared. Unshakable, perhaps. Unfeeling? Never. Her words settled over him like a blanket, both comforting and heavy. He wanted to press her further, to understand the person behind the stoic protector, but before he could, a sharp crack echoed through the air. The room vibrated, the windows trembling in their frames. Leora was on her feet in an instant, her staff drawn and glowing faintly. "What now?" Ethan asked, his heart racing. Leora didn't answer immediately. She moved to the window, peering out into the forest. The trees swayed violently, though there was no wind. "Something is coming," she said, her voice low and tense. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Something like the guy from before?" "No," she said, her grip tightening on her staff. "Worse." The forest had transformed into a battleground. Pulses of light arced through the trees, colliding with bursts of shadow that twisted and writhed unnaturally. Ethan stumbled after Leora, who moved with a precision born of instinct. "Stay close," she commanded, her tone brooking no argument. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The air was thick with tension, each breath feeling like a battle of its own. He could hear voices, low, guttural, and alien, interspersed with the clash of weapons. "What are they?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Agents of Nova Vigil," Leora replied. "They seek to capture you before the Queen can protect you." "Why me?" he demanded, frustration and fear bubbling over. "What makes me so special?" Leora hesitated, her eyes flicking to his for the briefest moment. "That is for the Queen to reveal." Ethan clenched his fists, biting back a retort. He didn't have time to argue, not with shadowy figures closing in around them. And they reached the nexus, the stones glowing brighter than ever before. Leora turned to Ethan, her expression uncharacteristically urgent. "You must make a choice, Ethan Voss," she said. "The nexus can take you to Evereth to safety, but once you cross there is no turning back." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "And if I don't go?" She looked away, her jaw tightening. "Then you face them alone." The ground shook violently, and Ethan nearly lost his footing. He could see the agents now, humanoid figures cloaked in shadow, their movements unnaturally fluid. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice shaking. Leora stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You can. You must." Before he could respond, one of the shadowy figures lunged toward them. Leora moved to intercept, her staff blazing with light as she struck. The clash was deafening, a burst of energy rippling through the air. "Go, Ethan!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before sprinting toward the nexus. The stones pulsed beneath his feet, their light enveloping him. When the light faded, Ethan found himself standing in a place that defied comprehension. Evereth was unlike anything he had ever imagined, a vast, shimmering expanse of crystalline structures and bioluminescent flora. The air was cool and electric, humming with an energy that made his skin tingle. But he wasn't alone. The Queen stood before him, her presence as commanding as ever. She regarded him with an intensity that made him feel both seen and exposed. "Ethan Voss," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. He swallowed hard. "I don't understand any of this. Why me? Why send Leora? Why do you—" "Love you?" she interrupted, her expression unreadable. He nodded, his cheeks flushing despite himself. The Queen stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You are a catalyst, Ethan Voss. Your existence bridges worlds, unites opposites. It is a rare and powerful gift, one that Nova Vigil seeks to exploit." Ethan shook his head, his confusion mounting. "But I'm just a guy. A normal, boring guy." The Queen smiled faintly. "You are more than you believe, and I sent Leora because I knew she would see what I see." Ethan glanced down, his thoughts a tangled mess. "I don't know if I can be what you need me to be." The queen placed a hand on his cheek, her touch cool but comforting. You already are. Their moment was shattered by a piercing scream. Ethan turned to see Leora stumbling into view, her suit torn and her face pale. They're here, she said, her voice barely audible. The queen's expression darkened, her regal composure giving way to fury. Then we fight. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped closer to Leora, helping her to her feet. What do we do? Leora looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. We survive. The three of them stood together, facing the approaching storm. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he had a purpose, and he wasn't going to back down. The battlefield was chaos, a maelstrom of shadow and light, alien forms twisting and clashing against the crystalline landscape of Evereth. Ethan crouched behind a jagged shard of crystal, his breath ragged, his heart pounding like a war drum. Nearby, Leora and the queen fought side by side, their movements a seamless dance of defense and retaliation. Stay down, Leora shouted, her voice sharp as she parried a blow from a shadowy agent. Ethan wanted to obey. He wanted to let the warriors handle the impossible, otherworldly threat bearing down on them, but something deep inside him, some spark he didn't fully understand, refused to let him cower. The queen's voice rang out, clear and commanding even amidst the chaos. Ethan, the Nexus Core, you must reach it. He turned, his eyes following the queen's outstretched hand. At the center of the battlefield stood a towering structure of crystalline spires, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic glow. The Nexus Core, the heart of Evereth, was a beacon of power and light. What am I supposed to do? He called back, his voice cracking. Restore the harmony, the queen replied, her tone resolute. The core responds to those who carry the spark of unity. You are the key. Ethan froze, the weight of her words crashing down on him. The spark of unity, a catalyst, a bridge between worlds. How could that possibly be him? Leora broke through his haze of doubt, her hand gripping his arm. Her face was bloodied, her suit in tatters, but her eyes burned with determination. You can do this, Ethan, she said, her voice fierce. I've seen it in you. He shook his head, his fear threatening to overwhelm him. I'm just a guy, Leora. I don't know how to be any of this. She leaned closer, her expression softening. You're not just a guy. You're Ethan Voss, and you've already done more than you ever thought possible. Trust yourself. Her words settled over him like a lifeline, anchoring him in the storm. He nodded, a shaky breath escaping him. Okay, let's do this. They moved together, weaving through the chaos. Leora fought off attackers with a relentless ferocity, clearing a path for Ethan as they approached the Nexus Core. The closer they got, the more Ethan felt its energy, a pulsing rhythm that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Behind them, the queen unleashed a torrent of light, her power radiating across the battlefield. She was a force of nature, her presence both terrifying and awe-inspiring. When they finally reached the base of the core, Ethan hesitated. The structure loomed above him, its spires glowing with an almost sentient light. What now? He asked, glancing at Leora. Place your hand on it, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Let it feel you. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he reached out. The moment his palm touched the surface, the world around him shifted. Ethan was no longer in Evereth. He stood in a vast, infinite expanse of light and shadow, the boundaries of reality blurring at the edges. A voice echoed around him, familiar and yet alien. Ethan Voss, do you seek harmony? He swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. The voice softened, almost compassionate. It is not perfection we seek, but connection. Unity does not require certainty, only courage. Ethan closed his eyes, the faces of Leora and the Queen flashing in his mind. They had believed in him, fought for him, and stood by him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. "I want to protect them," he said, his voice steady. "I want to protect this world. I'll do whatever it takes." The light around him intensified, enveloping him in warmth. "Then let us begin." Back in Avareth, the core erupted with light, its glow consuming the battlefield. The agents of Nova Vigil faltered, their forms disintegrating in the face of the overwhelming power. Leora shielded her eyes, her heart pounding as she watched Ethan, his form illuminated by the core's light. The queen approached, her expression a mix of awe and relief. "He has done it," she murmured. When the light finally subsided, Ethan stood at the base of the core, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes shining with newfound clarity. Leora ran to him, her relief palpable. "Are you okay?" she asked, gripping his arms. He nodded, a small, tired smile playing on his lips. "I think so. Did it work?" The queen answered, her voice resonating with pride. "Yes, Ethan Voss, you have restored balance to the Nexus." As the aftermath was a blur. The agents of Nova Vigil were gone, their threat extinguished, for now. The queen assured Ethan and Leora that Avareth was safe, though she warned that vigilance would always be required. As the dust settled, Ethan found himself standing with Leora on a balcony, overlooking the crystalline city. The stars above were impossibly bright, their light reflecting off the spires in a dazzling display. "You saved us," Leora said, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it. Ethan chuckled, though his eyes were serious. "I had a lot of help." She looked at him, her expression unguarded for once. "You were more than I ever expected, Ethan Voss, and I am proud to call you an ally." He smiled, warmth spreading through his chest. "Ally, huh? I was hoping for friend." Her lips twitched into a faint smile. "Friendship is acceptable." They stood in companionable silence, the weight of their journey settling over them. "Do you think this is the end?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Leora shook her head. But it is a beginning." As the stars shimmered above them, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time he felt ready to face it, together.